good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're dialing from. It's great to have so many participants in another online session as part of the British Council Higher Education Dialogue Series. So I see that our colleague who is providing technical support is still admitting participants in the waiting room, but I'll just do a short introduction and then we can kick off. It could be that some participants are a bit late, but as they joined, they'll be able to take part in the session. So once again, a very warm welcome. Today we will be talking about what universities can do to help their students become more employable, to find employment after they leave universities. And we will be doing this in an online format. As you can see, I would just like to remind everybody to mute themselves while we're talking because we want to avoid any background noise. I would also like to remind you that the session is being recorded. We will share the recording afterwards. If there are any issues with you not being able to hear us, it would be good to use the chat box just so we know if there are any issues that we need to be aware of. And I think even though we've got participants being admitted to the room as we speak, that we can probably slowly kick off the session because you'll be able to see the recording afterwards anyway. Just very briefly about the overall structure of the session. So we'll have our plenary discussion with our esteemed panelists for the first about 21 to 25 minutes. After that, we will all break out into separate breakout sessions for more in-depth conversation. And then after that, we'll all again meet up in this plenary session for the final Q&A, for any sharing of experience, questions, concerns, impressions, and then at that point we will wrap it up. So if that's okay with everybody, I would like to introduce our panel members, and then we can slowly kick off. So we've got our panel members today. The first speaker that will be contributing to this discussion is Martin Edmondson, CEO and founder of Gradcore, a social enterprise focused on transforming graduate recruitment and employability. And Martin is also a director of the Institute for Student Employers. So over to you, Martin, for your 7 minutes, approximately speaking.
Thank you, Maja. I'll just get my slides up quickly. Okay, thank you. It's a real privilege to be here. My name is Martin Edmondson. As Maja said, I'm the Chief Executive of Gradcore. I guess my job in this session today is to try and set the scene a little bit about the fundamentals of employability and what we're going to be talking about. Just a quick introduction to Gradcore as an organisation. We work at the intersection of employers and universities. You can see there on that slide just an example of some of the organisations we work with. And what we try and do on the employer side is we run various graduate schemes and recruitment programs for employers, help them with their strategy for recruitment. But then with universities, we similarly work on employability, strategy, delivery and development. And we've worked with a huge range of universities over the last 20 years across the UK, Europe and the US. So we'll hopefully bring some of that experience to this conversation today. Would be useful perhaps to start a set of webinars and dialogues and conversations. So think about the definition of employability is a term one that we know about quite a bit of disagreement and perhaps a little bit of misunderstanding about exactly what it means. It's often conflated with the term employment as well. So when we talk about employability and employment, we sometimes mention them in the same breath, but actually they're two quite different things. So I thought it'd be useful just to set out some definitions and then give some examples of how universities in the UK have approached this over the last couple of decades. So firstly, just a classic definition of employability is this one from Professor York. And what it talks about is the idea that employability is more than just getting a job. It's about the idea of developing a set of attributes and skills which are useful to the individual, but also useful to wider society. So that's a kind of classic definition of employability. But it's been broadened out by some people, and this came from an Australian university last year, this definition. And in this definition, you can see it's almost given a wider scope and cited as being employability being the purpose of education. Now, I'm sure some of you might agree with that, and some of you might disagree with that, and hopefully that will spark an interesting conversation as we move into the discussions later on about exactly how significant employability is as part of your university structure and strategy and approach, and what level of importance it is to you and your students and graduates. But finally, perhaps this definition is a useful one, which is from a professor in the UK at the university, who was at the University of Liverpool, which is to be employed is to be at risk, but to be employable is to be secure. So talking about the fact that it's not just about that individual point of getting a job, but those wider attributes and skills that make you more secure in your broader life as well as in your work. And I think that's what we're aiming to develop in students and graduates as we approach the question that we're looking at today. And as you'll hear specific examples from our university speakers after me. But I thought it'd be useful just to give an overview of how the UK higher education has changed its approach to employability in the last 20 years and how it's become a very different model in that period of time. And here's how we've gone from the things on the left-hand side there to the things on the right-hand side. And there's a kind of growing trend towards those different things. So the career services in universities have gone from being often quite small, minor parts of the institution to now being really integral parts of the university strategy, but also being embedded within the curriculum of the university as well. So not just operating as a separate activity about looking at things like CVs and job hunting, but actually part of everyday curriculum, employability woven into every subject in a university. We've gone from the idea of careers guidance to consulting. So people who work in career services increasingly support academics, help them to build employability into their careers, into their curriculum and into their programs. I think we've gone from employability being just the job of the career service to being the job of everybody in a university or everybody in an institution to make students and graduates more employable. I think we've gone from one-to-one guidance, so small individual interventions, to looking at interventions and activity that can impact every student in a university. I think we've gone from the idea of destinations, so just a graduate job, to the idea of wider outcomes. So how have we supported that student or graduate both to get a job, but also to become a really useful member of our societies? And finally, I think gone from general to personalised, so creating a situation where the offer of employability at university is individualised to the person so that it supports their personal goals as a student or a graduate. So finally, I just wanted to give a few examples that we've seen in universities around the UK and beyond of obviously supporting graduates in this particularly challenging year as we're all dealing with the issues created by the pandemic. So firstly, I'd say we have a lot of people using diagnostics now. So using small and large surveys to quickly find out where their graduates are, how they're doing, and what they can do to help so that any support can be tailored to individual graduates. That often leads to dedicated coaching programs. So having individual students and graduates supported by either careers advisors or HR recruiter people to get them into jobs. We run a program with a number of universities called Safety Net, which is designed to be exactly that. But we take a cohort of graduates from the university who haven't yet got the graduate job they were looking for, and we will assign them with recruitment coaches to support them into graduate level work, to help them with interviews, with assessment centres, with psychometric tests, and get them through those processes and into the jobs that they really want to do. We've also seen a lot of universities developing ideas around real and virtual internships. Now, internships have obviously, work experience has obviously always been an important part of employability development and how students and graduates transition from university to the world of work. We've seen those shift to being virtual models this year. Often, so for example, a university called Kingston University in South London in the UK, they've done a really interesting model with groups of graduates going out to work on virtual internships in local businesses, but delivered all through Zoom and Teams like this. And finally, using things like development centres and assessment centres, so large-scale assessment centres where we found it's been really powerful to work with perhaps 100 graduates, 200 graduates in a day across an assessment centre where they can think about their skills, test themselves against typical employer recruitment exercises, but also learn about their own skills and capabilities so that they can more effectively get into graduate jobs. So there's a huge amount of work going into supporting graduates into work this year. But as I say, all of it sits in that wider context where employability has gone from being a kind of marginal part of what happens in higher education to being really at the centre of how universities think and at the core of a lot of strategy of universities, particularly in the UK. So I'm going to stop there and hand back to Maja in terms of our next speaker.
Great, thank you. So interesting points and interesting concepts, which I'm sure we will be able to elaborate on further in breakout rooms, but also in the final Q&A and plenary session when we all come back together. So thank you for that, Martin. And I'll hand it over now to Professor Karen Bryan, Vice Chancellor from York St. John University. We know that Professor Bryan has joined St. John University as Vice Chancellor in April 2020, and before that she was previously Deputy Vice Chancellor at the University of Greenwich. So over to you, Professor Bryan.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll just take over the screen. Okay, I hope you can see that. Maja, is that okay?
Yeah, okay. That's fine. I can see it.
Okay, thank you very much. So good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon from York St. John University here in North Yorkshire. So in terms of York St. John University, we're a relatively small university, 7,675 students. 69% of our students have one or more characteristic that puts them in an underrepresented group within higher education, and 26% are the first person in their family to enter higher education. Most of our provision is in York, in North Yorkshire, 5% in London, and a little bit of transnational. 44% of our students come from Yorkshire, but 66% of our graduates stay in the Yorkshire region post-graduation. And one of the very important underpinning values to our institution is social justice, and much of our research is within the Institute of Social Justice. So I hope that just gives you a broad brush description of our university. So in terms of our approach to employability, employability for us meaning acquiring the skills, knowledge and experience to be suitable for a graduate job. And our approach essentially is to embed employability within the curricula of our programs. So we want students to acquire social and academic capital. We want them to learn how to navigate higher education, what graduate employment means, and to make choices to inform their personal journey towards a graduate job. We also want to develop their confidence and their resilience, initially to navigate university life, but also to give them those very important personal characteristics to take to their career. We want them to develop their skills capital, so their study skills, their capacity for academic attainment, and of course we want them to be successful graduates. So remember, some of them come to us with characteristics that make them less likely to succeed. So what we're trying to do is increase the prospect of them gaining a good quality degree. We also want to develop their intellectual capital. We want to develop their understanding by contextualizing subject knowledge and linking it to career opportunities. So our approach involves a personalized journey. So each student will follow their program. They will have in-curricular delivery around employability, sometimes delivered by our academics, sometimes by industry experts, sometimes by our dedicated careers service. But the journey will be slightly different for each student. We also share networks with students. We run annual graduate fairs, placement fairs, and we have volunteering opportunities. So our in-curricular delivery will link to those additional opportunities, which will be right for some students, not for others. We have an extensive employer and community engagement. So that will involve encouraging the student to build their own network, links with employers, links with industry, potentially study abroad, linking to the world of work through clubs and academic societies. We run peer-to-peer coaching schemes. We also have a scheme called Students as Researchers, so students can get involved in research to build up their own skills. And also we have a student ambassador scheme where the university employs trained students to be ambassadors for our institution, to help us run events, open days, etc. And we can even do that in the virtual realm. And then we have the learning through the workplace, which again links to the curriculum. So that might be employer-led workshops, mock assessment centres. We have a success lab which links industry workshops into the curriculum. So our journalism students might be working with an employer, learning how to write a press release. And then the quality of that press release might be the assessment. We also have a business creation offer. So we have a graduate director program, which students can enter. We link our student representation and student voice with these activities. And we also have an aspiration fund. So for example, if a student wishes to attend a business conference, they can make a case to be funded. And then just thinking a little bit more about the 2020 graduates who had a disrupted end to their education, but who now face a very difficult graduate job market. So we've extended our offer to those students. In fact, all of our alumni can access our careers service for life, but we have a particular offer for this year's graduates. So they can consult us to get advice. We're particularly keen to work with them to keep their skills alive, to credential their skills, to keep up their confidence in the skills that they have. They can link to employer networking through a series of panels and skill sessions that we're running. They can get involved in virtual projects and internships, working particularly with our local employers. There are various mechanisms for them to move on to postgraduate study, including a bursary to support our own graduates to move into postgraduate study. I've mentioned the graduate to director, so we're running a tailored version of that for our graduates. And also, given the challenges some of those graduates face, we're ensuring that they can continue to gain mental health and well-being support from us if that's important to them. So thank you very much. I hope that gives you a brief flavour of what we do at York St John. Thank you.
Great, thank you. That was an impressive list of different initiatives and things that are being put in place to support graduates and students. And I'm sure that we'll have questions and comments to that in our Q&A session, and especially in the breakout room later on. So I would now like to invite Adele Browne, who's the head of graduate success at the Montfort University, to join the session and provide her contribution. So just very briefly, Adele is, as I said, head of graduate success, and she leads on institutional graduate outcome strategy. So Adele, over to you.
So good afternoon, everybody, and it's a real pleasure to speak to so many people today from different countries. I'm also going to share a brief presentation with you about our activities at DMU.
And I can see the presentation, so it's working.
Okay, good stuff. So a little bit of background about Montfort University. We're based in Leicester, in the centre of England. We have 4 faculties, as you can see, and not dissimilar to York St John, we have a university with a lot of students from underrepresented backgrounds. So few of them will have been privately educated. About a quarter have or have declared a disability, and a lot of them also come from neighbourhoods or families where there isn't a history of going to university. And our approach to employability actually really does reflect that work that we do with our students. Typically, we've never had the assumption that our students will easily transition into competitive graduate jobs because they haven't had those networks and that social capital that perhaps some other students do have. So our whole focus is on the individual and on their ability to navigate the world of work and also to develop their own confidence and self-belief. So there are two pillars to our approach. The first is commercial awareness, or understanding the world that's out there. And we deliver that through bringing industry and enterprise into the curriculum, as many placements as possible of different lengths, types and flexibilities, bringing employers onto campus or virtually at the moment so that students have that exposure, and also very close relationships with the City of Leicester, where we can use those links with employers to offer formal placements, but also lots of other types of shadowing, networking opportunities. And then lastly, in the commercial awareness part, we really have placed and continue to place a strong emphasis on non-linear careers, and to help students understand that the title of their degree will not necessarily match the title of their job, and that all kinds of different industries and organisations offer a multitude of opportunities and need all kinds of different skills and different people. And I think that's a big piece of the learning that young people need support with. So the other pillar is self-awareness. Again, the placements on those types of experiences are essential so that students understand themselves and themselves in relation to other people and learn to behave and work professionally. And then this piece around mentoring, coaching and peer-to-peer support, which is so important for them to reflect, think about who they are, the strengths they have, things that they like doing. And that whole approach is designed to build skills, knowledge, really important self-belief and their social capital, with the aim of them having this sense of agency, of being proactive and adaptable. So in the COVID situation since March this year, in some ways, what's happened is we've accelerated what we were already doing and brought things in earlier that were maybe the beginnings of ideas, but we've suddenly realised how urgent they are because of the pandemic. So I've listed on this slide a number of successful initiatives we put in place since the beginning of our national lockdown in the UK in March. But I wanted to talk to you about 4 of them specifically, which I've highlighted in bold. So in the top right, where it says COVID-19 Digital Support Scheme for Small Businesses. So when we went into lockdown, we realised very quickly that the small businesses in Leicester, many of them may not have the ability to put their product range online, to offer their services virtually. They might not have websites. They may not have use of meetings technology. And within 3 weeks, we put in place a scheme where our computing students were linked with businesses that signed up for free digital support. And these partnerships lasted 2 weeks at a time, and gave the opportunity for the students to support businesses with their technical requirements. And it turned out very successfully. I think there were some risks involved because we put it in place quickly, but the pandemic made that urgency necessary. And in fact, the businesses were so pleased with the way the university had provided that support for them. And the students also reported that they felt this is a chance for me to keep building my skills, even though I'm locked down and I can't go into a placement. So that successful scheme will now become a permanent feature of what we offer. Secondly, bottom left, where I've got asynchronous employer showcase. So most universities in the UK, and I expect this is international, we run big employer fairs each autumn. And so there was a big discussion going on among universities how we're going to replicate these fairs in a virtual environment. And we took a decision quite early on not to try to replicate a live event, because we thought about employers' time, about the stress that is on everybody, about the question of student attendance and all of those factors. And we decided to do the employer showcase asynchronously. So we've given our employer partners and businesses in the city the chance to work with us so that we will set up a page on our internal careers platform on their behalf that then is a permanent showcase of who they are and the opportunities they have that students can come and look at whenever they want to, and we can keep it updated over the coming year. And businesses again fed back that they found this a really helpful offer, that they didn't have to set aside, you know, a specific time and to see students, but that we would provide that service for them. Thirdly is Business Startup Summer School. So we've put a lot of our activity into a virtual environment and have been really delighted with the continued student engagement through the whole summer. And I'm particularly highlighting the summer school because it was the first big thing that we did since March that we promoted to students. It was to encourage students to still think about starting a business and think about enterprise, to talk to local alumni and entrepreneurs. And we made a big noise about this. So in about March, April time, lots of promotion on different platforms. And it just created a wave of enthusiasm and recognition that we're going to continue supporting students as long as we remain working virtually. We had about 250 sign-ups. And again, it's something that as the summer school kind of name of it really helped us to create something that packed a punch. And then last, but I think in some ways one of the most significant developments is the recognition that no matter what students have taken part in when they're at university, so particularly thinking of those students who for one reason or another don't access placements or extracurricular opportunities, every student should be able to leave university articulating what their course gave them in terms of gaining a graduate job, setting up a business, or moving on with their life. So in January, we are going to pilot what we're calling exit interviews with one faculty, the Faculty of Arts, Design and Humanities, where industries have been particularly impacted by the pandemic. And we'll be having one-to-one interviews with every student in that faculty to help them talk about help them recognise and talk about what their studies have given them, to talk, you know, giving them the value to what they've learned and what they can offer employers as they step on into the world. So this is something that we're very excited about, and I think is likely to become a big feature as well of how we help students to step off at the end of university feeling confident. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Well, just very briefly, not really to summarize, but just highlight some of the interesting points and some of the interesting concepts that we introduced. So we heard about the difference between employability and employment. We heard about different schemes that exist in different institutions. It was really interesting to hear about the response to COVID, which is something that is obviously inevitable. It was really good to hear about the focus put on the overall support mechanism, mental health and well-being of students, and how they see themselves as somebody who will very soon be entering the labor market. So we've got a lot to discuss, and we're really happy now that we will break out into separate rooms so you can engage in a lot more detailed discussion about some of these things, and also share experience and examples from your own countries. So just to remind you, you can now break out into 3 different rooms. You can choose the ones that you're most interested in. I would like to encourage everybody to, if you go into a room and see that it's overly populated, that you do join another one. We are trying to maintain the balance of different voices and make sure that everybody has a chance to share their comments or experience. So you will be able to join breakout rooms using links that are now being provided in the chat box. You can see it there, so you just need to click on that one, and then we will also make sure that in those specific breakout rooms there are links to those other breakout rooms in case you need to move to another one. So you can now join, and we definitely encourage a wide and open discussion, but I also want to remind colleagues who are chairing these breakout sessions to take note of some of the key and interesting comments and questions that are being raised. So over to everybody to use the appropriate link and then move on to a separate breakout room. Okay, excellent. So as we mentioned at the very beginning, we structured the session so that we have a bit of the overall contribution from our panelists and then breakout session discussions. Now is our chance to really engage in a whole group discussion. So this is a kind of a Q&A session. It would be really good to hear from our panelists who were chairing these breakout sessions about some of the key things, key questions and key concepts or key comments that you received from our participants. So anything that you would like to share, which might also encourage participants to engage in a wider discussion. So I'll go to Martin first. So if you could just very briefly tell us the key highlights of the discussion and anything you want to share in this forum so that we encourage participants to share any immediate comments or questions about that.
Yeah, I could probably group the questions and discussion into sort of three main areas really. One was skills. So what skills are needed now and what are we developing in our students and graduates? So we had a really interesting set of conversations around that and about whether they've changed during the pandemic and the different ways that universities and partners and colleagues are developing skills in people. I think the second thing was about the role of employers. And so how do employers support and engage and get themselves involved in the development of employability in university, whether that's in curriculum or also in things like helping work with CV development, interview practice, assessment centres. And we talked a bit about, for example, how we can use assessment centres that might be recruitment can be used as a development tool with employers as well. And then finally, the other thing that I think we talked about was almost sort of the practicalities of careers delivery and career services. So we talked about the sort of size and shape of typical career services in the UK, varying from 5 people to 120 people in different UK universities, but also things like how that delivery shifted online to virtual conferences, virtual careers fairs, and we talked about the regularity and frequency and nature of careers fairs as well. So we covered quite a bit of ground, but I think probably those three things came up the most. So what are the skills that are needed and how do we develop them? What is the role of employers and how do we continue to grow that and how do we make the most of those connections? And then, what are the nuts and bolts of setting up or what does a career service, an effective career service look like? So that's probably a summary of our discussion.
Great, thank you. Can I just check if there are any immediate comments or questions about what Martin has shared? And feel free to raise your hand or just immediately speak out. And if you do, just make sure that you tell us which country you're dialing in from. And while you're thinking about possible questions or comments, Karen, over to you for a kind of quick summary of our breakout session.
Thank you very much, Maja. So hello again, everyone. So we had a very session. We talked about embedding employability in the curriculum, including the type of assessments that students undertake, so sort of authentic assessments that relate to the workplace, contextualizing their learning through projects that involve employers or involve real life scenarios, all those sorts of things, and that running across the whole life of the programme. And then our second topic was around placements and sandwich years, and we talked about whether those should be compulsory or whether it was actually better that they're available, but that students have options. And I think probably options, but an expectation that students undertake a placement at some point was one of the points that we discussed quite a lot. We also discussed the use of assessment centres. So that might be to prepare a student for a particular graduate opportunity. But also they could be used to encourage students to think about the skills they have, this keeping their skills alive issue, which Maja referred to. And also we heard about some examples of coaching for specific groups of graduates who are not finding it easy to find employment. And then we had a discussion about employability and international students. In my university, they access all the same support, but we talked about the importance of induction so that students have cultural awareness, making sure that international students have opportunities to mix, peer-to-peer mentoring, language support, and often that support being about confidence in using language. And then also having a variety of support options. So some international students really like to stay in touch with the international office. Some quickly find support through, for example, personal tutors, and others might feel more comfortable, for example, accessing support through chaplaincy. And all of those services can signpost international students to support for employability that's available. So those were our main topics. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Adele, over to you for a quick summary of what was mainly discussed in your room, key highlights and concepts discussed and questions raised.
Yeah, sure. So we talked first of all about kind of networks and using alumni to connect in for, to provide examples to students, support, case studies and connections, particularly, for example, around social enterprise, but also to offer different opportunities. And that linked into talking about virtual internships and how to set them up, particularly now that we are working virtually. And we talked about the real progress that you can make if you approach this from the point of view of benefits to the business. So where a business might start by thinking, I don't have time to take on an intern, it's turning that round and saying, having somebody come in at this time with fresh ideas, who can give an extra pair of hands, who can carry out a particular piece of work for you. And then once a business takes on an intern once, they tend to take them again and again. So again, the alumni network can be very useful for that. An interesting chat about PhD students and supporting research students into different types of careers, and kind of the work to do with employers around understanding the value of a research graduate and the analytical and other skills that they have. And then we talked kind of finally about some of the practicalities of these initiatives. So I was talking earlier about these new exit interviews we're setting up. So for a careers team of a limited number to carry out very big initiatives, that's a finite resource, but our relationships with colleagues all around the university is an opportunity to bring all kinds of other people in to work with students on kind of specific big events, large scale events, and that can be very positive for everybody involved.
Excellent, thank you so much. So I'll open up the floor now to all of our participants. It would be really great to hear your comments, especially if you now heard something about the breakout room discussion that you were not a part of. So I'm opening the floor. You can either use the chat box, you can raise your hand and ask a question. It would be really great to see you. So if you're interested in turning on your camera, that also would be a good thing. So over to you. And while we're waiting for questions to appear, I've got a question that I wanted to raise at the very beginning. We've heard so much about different initiatives that are put in place. It really, as I previously mentioned, it really is an impressive number of things that are being offered to students. So I think that the question for all of our panelists is, how is that being evaluated in terms of what kind of impact it has, how often that's being done, how that feedback from students is collated? I know you mentioned you work very closely with employers, kind of the real sector, but is there a system in place and how is that done and how regularly is it being assessed? Which of these measures and systems have the most positive impact? So maybe we'll take the reverse order now. So Adele, how about we start with you?